O benedicite Dominus, and welcome to question 169 of the Secunda Secundae. The topic for this lecture is modesty in clothing or modesty in apparel, outward apparel, and I am Dr. Thibault. So we are looking at the final potential part of temperance, which still falls under the category of modesty. So we have really spent quite a bit of time on modesty at this point. Only one question on modesty of itself, but we have a lot of different parts of modesty which we are looking at. So this is the final one. The next we will get into the precepts of temperance. So this one is kind of interesting and a little bit fun. You know, things of clothing is a little bit lighter than some of the other continence, and incontinence, for example, is a bit more challenging than clothing, right? This is something people actually do talk about from time to time. So is there virtue or vice when it comes to outward apparel, clothing and dress and the like? And again, St. Ambrose gives a very beautiful writing. I'm definitely going to have to read this writing of St. Ambrose in its entirety when I'm done with this, because it's just so well written, so beautiful. So I'm going to read it. The body should be bedecked naturally and without affection, with simplicity, with negligence rather than nicety, not with costly and dazzling apparel, but with ordinary clothing, so that nothing be lacking in honesty and necessity, yet nothing be added to increase its beauty. I think that's beautiful writing. Wish I could write like that. No wonder he was able to convert St. Augustine, right? He had quite the powerful speaking way with words. So this really is the whole answer. If you just want the whole answer in short, that's it. You know, it's not to make oneself ugly. It's not to pull oneself down, but don't cover yourself with this costly stuff, you know, in order to try to look better than you are. Let nature and then your natural beauty come through, really. And it's, if you want to improve your look, improve your virtue. If you have greater virtue, you'll be more appealing to others more than, you know, wearing whatever form of clothes. You know, you see the people like the Karens online or something like that. They could be wearing nice clothes, nice makeup, nice jewelry, driving a nice car, but their behavior, right? It's the behavior, their virtue or lack of virtue, which makes them unappealing to people, right? They are not comely people, right? They're not a breath of fresh air. It's not because they're not physically attractive or with a nice apparel, but the inner matters more than the outer appearance, right? So it is not, St. Thomas then goes, it is not the thing, but how one uses them, and he looks at this in two ways. He says, well, look in terms of custom. And this is a bit unexpected, a little bit, because, you know, Christianity is supposed to be in the world, but not of the world. And a big part of Judaism is remaining separate from the world. Yet here, St. Thomas points out that we should be acting in comparison with the customs and not to harmonize. Not to harmonize with the whole is offensive. And I think this is an interesting point, you know, good for a class discussion, how to do this. So some of the things I'm thinking of when I think of it, you know, to dress like a geisha, for example, right? If you are a white woman and you're dressed as a geisha in Louisville, Kentucky, you're not fitting in with the customs. You're not harmonizing with the way of life there. It might be extremely modest dress, but it's not appropriate there. Or if you're a guy, from Boston, and you love wearing a kilt. Well, that's it's really not harmonizing with the customs of the place in which you live. If you do it, you become a spectacle, right? And that's not the point, is to be a spectacle. If you did live in Scotland, though, there are quite a few occasions where men do wear kilts. I had lived in the northern part of Scotland when working on my doctoral dissertation, and I was at a monastery to do it. So people would come there for baptisms and, to go to mass and things like that. And it would not be uncommon to see somebody dressed in a kilt in the Highlands of Scotland, or if there was a soccer game, that they would wear the kilt because they wore the colors of their soccer team colors, as a type of. Here we might wear a jersey or something like that. There they might wear the kilt of the team. So, in Scotland, makes sense. In Boston on the subway on a Tuesday afternoon doesn't really make sense, right? So to follow one's customs is important. Now, where this gets challenging is there are certain customs, like teenage girls in the summertime who wear shorts that are so short that if they had any butt cheek, it would be showing. But most of them are so skinny that they probably don't have anything to show anyway. But, their shorts are so high that it leaves nothing for the imagination. You can see their entire leg. And beyond that, they might even wear it to mass or to something, grandma's birthday party, things like this, where it's like, I'm not sure who allows a teenage girl to leave the house wearing no pants, no dress, no clothing, right? Or, a top that's so low and there's no arms and it goes so high. It's like, I'm not sure that this is, right. This might actually be the custom of teenage girls in America in the 21st century, right? That it might be fitting the custom, but it doesn't seem to be appropriate. Now, this does seem to be, it has to be held in balance, right? So if instead of wearing the shorts and the non-existent top, she decides to dress like Queen Victoria on a Sunday afternoon, that might not be according to the custom either, right? Right. So there are extremes, right? If you dress as if you are Amish, for example, and you are not Amish, as a form of modesty, it might be excessive, right? So the appropriate thing here would be harmonizing with the culture, but doing it in a way that is modest, right? So find a modest way of being a teenage girl, not to be a 19th century Queen of England, right? There's a way to balance that. Otherwise, you become a spectacle. And I imagine there is, there are teenage girls, they could wear some type of skirt or shorts that could be longer, but still stylish and, consistent with her age and her group and her place within the history of time. So, there are degrees, right? There's degrees to which you can do this. The second one is that there can be a lack of moderation in excess of pleasure. This is a bit of a difficult one to get my head around today, because if we try to think about, people say, I wear what's comfortable, right? That's what you hear people say who are often improperly dressed. It's usually by being too casual, right? It's wearing pajamas to Sunday Mass. It's wearing a T-shirt and shorts when the proper dress code should have been probably a button-down dress shirt and at least a pair of khakis, right? Or a blouse and a skirt or something like that. There would probably, people who use pleasure are often not the ones who are wearing long flowing velvet robes. Although I suspect at the time that St. Thomas is writing, this idea of the pleasures was more sensual. It probably had more to do with silk and satin and velvets and costly fabric, unlike the the woolen fabric made, that gets itchy and hot, right? Would have been these delicate fabrics. Now we can have silk and stuff like that, and it's relatively cheap because we can make it synthetically. But and we don't typically do it, right? How many people do you see wearing a silk shirt today? Not since the early 90s, I suspect. Mostly because they might seem like they're sensual, but then they show all the sweat. I remember having one as a kid. They show all the sweat, and they're not nearly as pleasurable in the long run as just a plain old cotton shirt, right? So this one is a bit tough. So I think it's moderating the luxury of pleasure, which might be a little bit different than today. Next is the next question is a tough one. We're still on the first one. Sorry, I'm looking at the second half. St. Thomas puts a lot. There's only 2 articles, but he puts a lot in each. So the other part is virtue and vice and outward apparel. There can be excess and deficiency. Right. So this is important. So I gave it its own slide. There can be excess and deficiency. He says there can be excess in 3 ways. Now these lines are somewhat blurred, and it's not entirely clear to me. Maybe it's clearer to you. Make blurred lines make great for great discussions in class. So maybe that you could bring it up if people even have classes on the virtues anymore. But if one dresses out of excess of glory to seek attention as a kind of ornament, then that is inappropriate. So in terms of excess of glory, if somebody is wearing something, just, it's the appropriate dress is business casual, something like that. And you wear a 3-pieced Edwardian suit with a cane and a straw cap, right? There's some people who do that. We're a very quirky culture that's open to people expressing themselves in many different ways, and that's out of all ways to express yourself less offensive than a lot of other things people do. But it's attention seeking, right? It's an excess of glory. If you're wearing all of the cufflings and all of the boutonnieres and the straw hats and all of this, there is an excess in glory in it, right? It's attention seeking. A person might like it, right? But it really would be, what's appropriate. Even watching channels like the Gentleman's Gazette, for example, where they advocate for dressing in a classic men attire, things like that. Even they would point out, if you're going to somebody's wedding, in the Victorian period, in the upper classes, you would have worn, a tuxedo. You would have worn tails. You would have worn, white tie to something like that. If you get invited to a wedding today and you show up in white tie tuxedo, that would not be appropriate. Even people like the Gentleman's Gazette, who advocates for proper dress and classics men's dress wear, would say you're going to take the attention off of the couple getting married and put it all on you. That's daft. Right? It's a faux pas. You don't take, it's like women who, the mother of the bride wears a wedding dress to her son's wedding, right? A woman shouldn't wear a wedding dress to somebody's wedding unless they're the bride, right? It's just not what you're supposed to do. You're receiving excess of glory, Same thing maybe like wearing a kilt or something like that to somebody's wedding when you're not, if you're not in Scotland and you're not Scottish, it could be, just fit in, right? Fit in with society. And why is this even important? Well, because we should be focusing on who we are, our virtues, our character, not all about showing, the clothing. It's not all about the clothing. Now, next one, excess in pleasure. Again, this is the tough one because today the nicer clothes are not as comfortable as the cheap clothes, right? Sweatpants and a t-shirt might be more comfortable than a nice suit. So it's a bit opposite, but I guess we could use it in either way, right? Either fancy clothes because we like silk and satins and all of that, which might be an excess of pleasure, or even if we say, t-shirt and sweatpants, right? If your outward apparel is excessively pleasurable, right? Excessively casual, maybe, that would be an extreme too, right? That would be an excess of comfort, where it's not appropriate. I remember going to Mass at a college campus, and church is full, which was wonderful, packed full of students, which is great. But the number of students who showed up wearing pajamas to Sunday Mass was, a bit of an eye roll. The Garfield slippers or something like that, not really appropriate for Mass. Glad you showed up, but probably should have tried something else. And lastly, excess in the way of spectacle, right? Too solicitous for attention, right? If you're doing it because you want everyone to look at you, right? And perhaps this is more about things like what we drive rather than what we wear. But, this could be, you're wearing the Armani, you have the Gucci belt, you got the handbag, the $5,000 pocketbook, and things of this nature. You're just being a spectacle, right? You're doing it so people look at you. This is clearly an excess, right? Not a really good thing. Then there's also the deficiency, which is being quite lazy. And St. Thomas says this can be ascribed to effeminacy. Remember, we covered effeminacy already. And this is not really like being feminine, right? In femininity, we often think of being feminine. It's in some ways, it's this kind of general laziness that has no backbone, that has no magnanimity, right? They have no, it's kind of like pusillanimity, right? The small soul, having a small soul, being, so lazy you can't even put any effort into it. The image of effeminacy for me is, a middle-aged man sitting on his couch, dishes in the sink, playing video games, smoking pot, has his minimum wage job and hasn't read a book since high school. This type of, just no effort, right? No effort put into life, living, or anything. The example St. Thomas uses for this effeminate person is somebody who has a robe that's dragging on a cape that's dragging on the ground, and they don't even have the effort to lift it up, right? You could pick it up and put it in your arm, right? So it's not dragging on the ground, but you don't even do that. I suppose, you get in trouble nowadays talking about cultural things, but, the sagging pants, I don't know, I think that's as much of an issue, but I'm sure it will come back in 10 years because it just, these styles rotate. But, the sagging pants, this is really an image of effeminacy. It's just laziness, right? It's kind of a lack of, it's bragging about a lack of attention. Like, my pants are falling down and I don't even care, right? That's the vibe, all right? If I were to pull up my pants, it would show that I care, and I don't even care, right? As a style, right? Super baggy clothes that can be wrinkly or whatever. It's kind of like, look how much I don't care. Look how much I don't care about society. I don't care about what proper people think about me. Kind of a middle finger up to society, to the church, to having a job, to education, to the police, right? To all institutions which should have some degree of nobility about them, just kind of a forget you type of attitude towards it. I know there's deeper cultural elements of things like sagging pants, but, and there might be reasons why they want to say, give you the finger to the rest of society because they feel as if there has been so much injustice to them based on that. But that's the vibe, right? The vibe is kind of a establishment vibe, which has this element of effeminacy and laziness to it. Secondly, glory from a lack of attention on outward attire. Now, this is like the other extreme of it. So this would be, and I could be guilty of this thinking back to my own past, wearing sandals when I was younger, and still in my undergraduate years, I wore sandals, and even when it was snowing, I would put socks. They were like Birkenstock sandals. I had big puffy socks, and sometimes I have to put a bag in between 2 layers of socks so that my feet wouldn't get wet when it was snowing out. Right? I was volunteering with bringing food to the homeless and one of the or poor people who were poor. And there was one guy complaining about the snow and the cold in his boots. And then they just pointed out my feet were just caked in snow, right? They just caked in snow because they didn't melt because the heat from my feet didn't get to the outside of the socks. So it just looked like my feet were entirely encased in snow. And the poor man, offered me his boots because he thought that I must have been poorer than him, right? Or I've worn shoes so thin that people have given me money for new shoes because they assume that I'm too poor to afford new shoes, right? This, I think I've done it more out of a lack of care, right? In some ways, I'm not sure why I did the sandal thing, but a lack of attention. Like I don't have the time to go get other shoes. I don't care. But if you're doing it to seek attention, right? Kind of like a Tartuffe example, right? The holy man who's constantly mortifying himself and dressing in poor clothes in order to draw attention to the fact of, look how poor, look how humble I am, right? And the most humblest of people, right? If you're doing it for a show, right? This is to get glory for your poverty, right? This is part of the issue, right? And this can be brought up, in terms of church matters. And St. Thomas brings this up in Church Matters. It was, I think it was objection 2 that it was brought up, that church people, right, churchmen, dress ostentatiously. So why shouldn't everyone dress ostentatiously, at Mass? And the point is, according to one's state of life, there's an appropriate dress, right? There's an appropriate dress to it. And often we have these kind of strange views of this for, particularly the papacy. They get the brunt of it. The average bishop person dresses pretty regularly, but everyone wants to know what color are the Pope's shoes, right? Pope Benedict had red shoes. Oh my God. You would have thought that he had, it was calling for a crusade, right? He wore red shoes. What hat did he wear? What was the stole? What was his chair made out of? What's the cross that he's carrying? Right? This is very important optics to people today, particularly the secular press more than anyone else. But it becomes an obsession, right? And Pope Francis and Pope Benedict, pretty far extremes on this one in terms of their messaging using these types of images. But there's a warning here of, the Pope is the vicar of Christ, vicar of St. Peter. Red shoes is not particularly ostentatious. To be honest, it's not particularly ostentatious. Go to a shoe store today, you will see shoes in every possible color on the shelf. And they're not really any more expensive than black shoes, right? So somehow red shoes or red socks, we wore red socks. Red socks and black socks cost the same amount of money, right? If it is the custom and the dignity of the papacy to wear red shoes and red socks compared to black shoes and black socks, well, he is the Pope. There's only one. Well, now there's 2, but there's typically only one on earth. And if they want to wear red socks, that's befitting their dignity, right? They wear a white cassock when everybody else wears a different color, right? he is the Pope. I'm not sure a white one costs any different than a black one or a purple one or a red one, right? It is simply a color, and if one dresses according to one's office and dignity, that is perfectly appropriate, right? You might question the triple crown tiara, which they haven't worn since Paul VI. But but again, as the head of the universal church on earth, if they want to wear a metal hat, I'm not sure why this is a major issue as the vicar of Christ, right? Because to show, bringing it back to this question number 2 of deficiency, to show, to try to show poverty in an extreme way when you're not poor, if you're doing it for the glory of saying, oh, isn't it amazing that he's so poor? If you're doing it for attention, then you're doing it for the wrong reason, right? And I think people criticize Pope Francis for this a lot, but I think that it really is also authentically who he is, right? As the Archbishop, he would ride the bus, right? He wasn't doing it for attention then. Now that he's Pope, he probably wouldn't do it for attention now, right? Somebody like Joe Biden taking the train, well, he did it when he was a nobody. He did it when he was a little bit more of a somebody. He did it when the cameras weren't looking. Therefore, it's somewhat authentic, right? If you're a politician who, gets driven around and then, for a publicity stunt, you go and take the subway with all the cameras there, and stuff. It's like, I think Hillary Clinton did that when she was campaigning in New York or something like that. All the cameras were there and she couldn't get the machine to work because it was probably her first time ever using the subway, right? This is an attention. There's a glory in the demoting of oneself. That's just not a virtue, right? Virtue would be being who you are, right? When you're a priest and you're saying the Mass, you should wear nice vestments. When you're back in the rectory, wear appropriate vestments, right? When you're doing your gardening, wear dirty clothing, right? You just do what is fitting to your state of life. That's what is appropriate, not in excess or deficiency. I think I probably kicked this dead horse to an end, but we should not be ostentatious by our trying to be richer or poorer than we are. Now, this next one is the adornment of women. Although he really St. Thomas covers the adornment of women and men. Both of them are addressed in this section. It's just the adornment of men is less of an issue than the adornment of women, right? I say that's unfair. Well, it's unfair. But if you think about it, even today, right, even looking at it in the 21st century, if you look at men, when they're wearing shorts, they're probably wearing shorts that go down to the knee or past. Otherwise, they wear pants that go all the way to the ground, covering all of their legs. Men wear, if they're lazy, a T-shirt, which covers down to their elbow and covers all of their stomach and all the way up to their neck. Button-down shirts or polo shirts are very common for men, which cover, with collars and buttons and all of the body. Some men wear like a piercing or two, maybe a chain, depending on the year or the month that styles change. Men's hair is typically, pretty boring. Facial hair or none, pretty boring. Makeup, none. Right? Men don't have much, right? So to say, men are trying to seduce women with their apparel. Now, attractive men's apparel is like T-shirt and jeans, right? It's not particularly lustful. And in addition, St. Thomas points out, women are not seduced by men that way, right? Women aren't lusting after men based on their clothes usually. or their accessories, right? Women just aren't doing that. In contrast, what are some of the extremes of women's apparel? It can be extremely low cut dresses, no sleeves at all, maybe even no upper pot. Maybe it stops right above the nipples, right? There's nothing above there, open back, no back, very high skirts, so high that you can practically see their rear end, it covers nothing. Right? Very skinny, right? You can see every fold of fat, every wrinkle, everything, right? It leaves no imagination. Maybe big sections of the stomach showing, right? And then you add on to it makeup and hairstyles and jewelry, and the list goes on. There's quite a bit that women do, and a lot of it is intended to be very attractive and inspire some type of lust, right? It tries to capture the male gaze. Right? You can say we don't, but why on earth would you dress like that if you weren't trying to attract the eye of men? If you were just simply doing it for comfort, you would wear a skirt that goes down past the knees. That'd be way more comfortable. Something loose fitting, not something that's skin tight. You wouldn't want your breasts popping out of your clothes. I can't imagine that's comfortable. I don't know, but and a lot of effort put into it. So to oppress either other women or men, this becomes more of an issue for women than men. So St. Thomas breaks it down into really two categories, and there's an unspoken third category too. So first category is married women. And married women, according to St. Thomas, and he points out there are plenty of people who disagree with him, but he says women should adorn themselves appropriately, make themselves attractive, because single people, consecrated virgins, are to put all of their energy into God. But we have said repeatedly that married people have to give themselves to worldly things. A woman is busy about pleasing her husband, and a husband is worried about pleasing his wife. Therefore, they're not consecrated solely to God the way a consecrated virgin is, or a religious or a priest is. Right? This is the nature of it. So, if you aren't busy about doing the Lord's work, but the work of married life, part of that is to be appealing to your spouse. Right? This works for men and women alike. Right? To maintain healthy body, good appearance, and attractiveness to your spouse. And St. Thomas even says this is to keep, if you don't do this, you might be leading your husband into adultery. I know that's a very controversial thing to say. But if we're not constantly making ourselves attractive to our spouses, then if we are not physically attractive, we're not emotionally attentive, we're not busy about our marriages, then our marriages are going to fall apart, and people are going to look for attention and everything else somewhere else, right? So it might not seem polite to say, but both men and women have to be concerned about themselves and to try to please their spouse, right? This is part of it. So good, if you want to wear a little bit of jewelry and put on some nice clothes to please your husband, or a husband do the same to please his wife, that's appropriate. Now, if you're a consecrated virgin or a widow, or you're in a state of life in which you're not getting married, well, then you should be dedicating that energy to the love of God, right? You don't have a husband to please, you don't have a wife to please, so don't waste your energy on it. And if you do put all that energy into your appearances, aren't you just leading people into lust, right? You're leading people to have sexual interest in you when you're not available, right? You're not going to marry them. You're not going to date them. Why are you arousing people's passions in you when you're not available, right? That would be a good thing. All these people are like, well, I'm not looking to date. I'm not interested in anyone. Well, the way you dress is to entice and draw the eye to you. So you say, well, I'm doing it for myself. Well, think about, St. Thomas would say, think about how that affects other people. Now, that third group that isn't talked about are those who maybe they're dating or marriable age and disposition, but they aren't married. You can't completely neglect your looks if you're looking for a husband or wife, but you're not doing it to please your husband or wife because you don't have one. So there's an intermediate stage that's not really talked about there. But I think the balance would be that you do want to look good, but you want to still have something, leave something for the future, right? You don't put it all on display. St. Thomas says it is frivolity, or some form of vanity for the sake of ostentation. It is sometimes venial, right? So if the reason why you're doing it, particularly teenage girls, probably big into that, it's just frivolous and vain, right? It's not they're trying to create lust or something. They're just being frivolous. It just might be a venial sin to try to make yourself look like that for frivolous purposes. If the purpose is to be sensuous, right, to create lust in another or contempt for God, I'm not sure how one does that, but if you do it out of lust, then that would be a mortal sin, right? So your clothing can be a mortal sin if that's its purpose, is to inspire lust. Now, we already did. Married people are concerned about pleasing one another. That's the important part. Okay, last new material here. It goes on. When we get into the objections, there's interesting things there. Now, people like Cyprian of Carthage, which shouldn't be surprising, all of them from Carthage are very conservative, right? Carthage is in northern Africa before the Muslims conquered it. They were very strict, right? They were even against things like the sacrament of reconciliation, because they thought, well, if people could confess their sins, then why not just keep sinning, right? You have to stand for something. So, if you sin, you're out, right? After you were baptized, if you sin, you're out. Like, these people were very strict in Carthage. So Cyprian isn't surprising in his. St. Augustine, also one of those northern Africans, he's also a bit extreme like that. And the gospel itself, right? Or not the gospel, the letter of St. Timothy, written by St. Paul. Women in inordinate apparel, adorning themselves with modesty and sobriety, not with plaited hair or gold or pearls or costly attire, right? This is very, Pentecostal people, they focus a lot on this within the letter to St. Timothy. Right, women shouldn't be wearing jewelry. They shouldn't be wearing costly clothes and things like this. Focus on the virtues, not on what you're putting on your body. That's the most important thing. Next is St. Cyprian of Carthage. Makeup is a falsification which cannot be devoided of sin. So makeup it's fake, right? It's falsing. It's a falsehood. It's bad. St. Augustine likewise says, to dye oneself with paint, makeup, is in order to have rosier or paler complexion, is a lying counterfeit. He says, not even husbands really want that to be lied to like that, right? Makeup being a lie. St. Thomas is a bit more moderate, and he says, if it's to cover a disfigurement or sickness, then it can be allowed, right? If there's extenuating circumstances, then go for it. But otherwise, on a general sense, be your natural self, right? Going back to the opening lines from St. Ambrose, be your natural self. Let your natural beauty shine forth, right? Be simple, right? Be claritas, right? Be clear, be transparent with who you are. Don't be, the makeup. And you see these videos sometimes of somebody, that's an attractive woman, and she scrubs the makeup off and pulls the wig off and takes her teeth out and takes this out. Before you know it, it's like it's a man or it's a woman who does not look as good as when she had all that stuff on, right? You might have seen those before. And lastly, another one of response to objection 3, the idea of cross-dressing is also forbidden in here, both for men and for women, because they lead to some type of sensuous desires sometimes. And also because when the Gentiles did it in the Old Testament, the pagans, the Babylonians in particular, they did it for idolatrous purposes. It was often related to some type of religious ritual or cult, or orgy cults and things like that. So the Jews separated from it, and St. Thomas thinks as well, keep away from all of that. But he does say, in a situation where you don't have any other clothes, I think this is more for women dressing as men than the other way around. But, you're too poor and all you have is your brother's hand-me-downs, and it's men's clothes. Well, if that's all you got, then that's what you wear, right? Or if you're... If you need to do it from deceit, right? If you're in a war and you need to, the soldier dresses like a prostitute woman to sneak into the camp to help try to win the war. If that's the purpose, then that's a different. It's not really for pleasure or something like that. It's for a purpose. If there's a reason, right? If you're in a play, right, and that's part of the play, it's not sinful. It's just if it's that kind of fetish element of cross-dressing that's the problem. It does create the issue of today, can women wear men's clothes? Well, they do all the time. But then if women do all the time, then it brings into question, is it actually then still men's clothes, right? If before jeans and a t-shirt were men's clothes, and now women wear jeans and a t-shirt, and how is it still men's clothes? Because if a woman's wearing it, a lot of women wear it, then it becomes women's clothes, right? So some of this is cultural as well. So in conclusion, I went much longer on only 2 articles than I probably should have, but it's kind of a fun topic. Vice and virtue do exist within outward apparel, and the adornment of men and women are both of issue in terms of mortal sin, venial sin, or no sin at all. So one should consider their outward apparel and outward behavior. So next we are moving into the precepts of temperance.